a playlist original.
This will be the greatest war the world has ever seen. We need the greatest warrior.
You're waiting for me.
I won't ask you to fight my war. You already have. The loser will burn before nightfall.
Before my time is done, I will look down on your corpse and smile.
Troy, a Wolfgang Petersen film. This film is not yet rated. May 14th.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your hosts, Gaius and Jackson. Very excited to dive into this episode where we are looking at 2004's Troy, starring Brad Pitt and Eric Bana. This is one of my picks for the month of May. Our anniversary picks turns 20 years old this month, and very excited, Gaius, to get your reaction to this movie after not seeing it since theaters, I believe. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, I haven't watched it since it came out in theaters, and I really thought there would be a lot of it I wouldn't remember. Or, I mean, some of it did feel very new, but I was just telling you right before we started this that there were certain scenes when they popped up that it was a little bit like kind of in total recall to like seeing it in theaters. Like, oh, I remember that moment, or the specific scene, or especially some of the visuals that kind of stood out where I was like, oh yeah, I do remember how like great that looks on the big screen, and stuff like that. Yeah, another one that we're recording. It's May 13th on a Monday right now. Tomorrow will be its official 20th anniversary. Although today it did premiere at the Cannes Film Festival 20 years ago.
Okay, nice.
It premiered out of competition during that time. I also got to read a little bit about the making of the movie in preparation for this, and like to hear. I told you about what Orlando Bloom has talked about the other day regarding the movie. I read some of Brad Pitt's comments, I guess, post it coming out. Peter O'Toole has a very harsh statement about the movie.
Very contentious making of for this movie.
Yeah. What I learned though is that even some of the people like Brad Pitt and Orlando Bloom, who they weren't outright negative about it, but all they said was, "Hey, people love the movie though. It's become popular in its own right." It wasn't like a huge box office hit here. I think it did like 133 million domestic, but it was because of like the movies, like the story and international appeal. It made $497 million worldwide, so it's considered a hit despite having a reported $185 million budget at the time. One of the most expensive movies made during that period. You can tell it's all on the screen. It's a very like beautiful looking movie.
Beautiful looking movie. A lot of that though too, as I'm sure you learned while reading up on the making of that movie, this had a notoriously troubled production history involving like many sets being destroyed from a hurricane, and production moving locations sort of spontaneously, I imagine, ate up a lot of that budget too. But it looks glorious, and it honestly, while watching it, I think today, because I'm no stranger to this movie, I've seen it several times and love it very much. But this watch, more than any, I think prior, I kind of like acknowledge how much of like a classical Hollywood movie it really seems to be. Like some shots of like Brad Pitt just staring out into the open ocean and the big battle sequences. It feels like this was made in like the 60s or something. Like I feel like Wolfgang Petersen was very inspired by like Spartacus or something like that.
Yeah. You can kind of, it really is, a lot of it is on the screen, which I thought was great. I was trying to talk to a few friends. When we talk about anniversaries, I ask friends like, "Oh, when did you watch this last, or have you seen it?" And my buddy Mike, he was one of the people that talked about it a little bit, and he did acknowledge that it's a beautiful looking movie, but he said something along the lines like it almost looks like too clean. It looks a little too commercial, and I guess there's an argument to be made that it does look very. It looks like a Hollywood movie.
It looks like a Hollywood movie, yes. I agree.
Yeah, but I think there's some callbacks to that almost kind of like old school filmmaking style, and its look where it looks that you still get the vibe that I really felt the period still though. It didn't really feel like something that was out of place and too cleaned up by Hollywood standards. Now I think from the production, like whatever stages it's happening, whether it was the writing, filming, or post-production and marketing, I think it was pushed more as a commercial Hollywood movie compared to something like, say, Gladiator, which had a little bit more award prestige behind it.
Right.
I think that there was a hope that this would have some award prestige behind it, but at the end of the day, I think they went a more commercial route for mass appeal, at least financially, to see if they can make their money back.
I think you're
and
right.
I understand that. Like when I was watching it, I thought it was very entertaining, and the fact that it's long now. We almost had to watch a longer cut of this movie. There was a big debate on. I was like, are we watching the director's cut or the theatrical cut? And I didn't look up the time until I started watching. Once we decided that it was going to be the theatrical cut, it was like 2 hours and 40 some odd minutes. So
it's a lengthy one.
Pretty long. And then I looked at how long the director's cut it was. It's 30 minutes longer than that. So the 3 hour plus movie.
You're welcome for saving that extra time. I 100% wanted to watch the director's cut. Though. Yeah. No, it has a great pacing. I didn't notice. It was funny because my girlfriend sat down and watched this one with me, and she commented on the length of the movie. She didn't stick around for the whole thing, but it was funny because I just chuckled to myself because this movie to me, maybe because I'm so familiar with it and I know it beat for beat, it just flies by for me. So I didn't notice that runtime really much at all.
Yeah,
but definitely a lengthy one.
I didn't either. I thought I would sitting down to watch it. I was like, oh god, this is long. Because sometimes movies like this can't feel long, but I think the pacing works. Some of the battle scenes are really well done. I actually was more impressed by the one-on-one fight scenes more than the big massive group battles. Like the one-on-one fight scenes have they're I guess the best way to put it is they're a little bit more intimate, raw. They're there's less
100%.
Things going on, and to find out particularly with Eric Bana and Brad Pitt's fight that they didn't use stunt doubles. They wanted to really just go all out and do it. That made that a lot better to watch.
Do you know the story behind how they agreed to do that?
No,
and the gentleman agreement they had?
Oh yeah, okay. I didn't hear a little bit about that. But yeah, I thought that was really cool and really interesting that that's how that kind of came about. And you can kind of tell that makes that fight more engaging because you're like, oh, it's really them. And you're not really seeing him. You're not seeing a moment where it's cutting away because someone else had to step in. Not that we don't appreciate the work of a stunt double and stunt performers, but it's really great when you can actually have the real actors doing that because it
looks more authentic, obviously, right? When you have your actual actor doing it, and
it adds more emotional depth to that fight because there's more to it than just it allows you to really be immersed in the movie and then not check out and be like, oh well, this is a film. That's definitely not Brad Pitt in all those scenes. It's definitely not Eric Bana. Knowing that it gives it a bit more authenticity that I think helps.
Sometimes though, standing in and not using stuntmen though can add to a movie's detriment, and that was the case with Troy. There was I'm not sure how long he was injured for, but the production was halted for quite a while because Brad Pitt, in a really strange form of coincidence, actually tore his left Achilles tendon. The character that he's playing in the movie and where that tendon is named from, in that fight scene where he's fighting at the beginning, where he does that one-on-one duel with that massive soldier, and he jumps up and stabs him through the collarbone. When he landed, he actually tore his Achilles tendon, which is such a weird twist of fate that he would. That is a really weird twist of fate.
Yeah. However, a great trailer moment because they use that moment in one of the film's trailers. I rewatched one of the movie's trailers, and they use that as one of the money shots. So I'm not sure if how much of that shot is used before he gets said injury. But that's really funny, interesting turn of events. He plays Achilles, and then he actually injures his Achilles tendon. I read that it was several weeks, so it must have been that. Also will make
your budget increase.
And make a lot of production. I know Diane Kruger actually also who plays Helen also talked about the filming of the movie. Didn't have anything negative to say about it, but she said the conditions were very, at that time of her career, it was a lot, and it was just just it was the weather conditions, everything about that, but then also she's not a lot of women on set. It was definitely a club for sure, and it was a lot of pressure on her as an actress at that age, at that time. Just kind of feeling that. So while she said that the leads and everything were very supportive and kind, it was still a lot of pressure filming it on her. Looking back on it, I can't remember what I thought of her or if she had a lot more to do when I remember seeing it in theaters. But then watching for this, I was like, oh, I guess she, for something that is so motivated by, at least in large part, by this kind of union between her and Paris, I guess. She doesn't really have like a ton of screen time compared to everyone else.
Right.
Like, so like I, not that it's a detriment at all. I was always, I kind of forgot. I was like, I felt like she was maybe in it more when I first saw it. And I was like, oh, I mean, not like she's like some side supporting character, but I definitely thought she was in it more. I first saw it when I first saw it, but not a ton.
Interesting enough, and I think this what I'll about to get into might add to sort of why she is not much of prominent in the character, but for the character Helen of Troy, like very famous mythological like Greek figure in Homer's Iliad, which Troy is adapting very loosely, apparently.
Yeah, every time I look this up for any like retrospective feature or review from back in the day when it came out,
people always
every
point that
reviewer, very like one guy was like very, very loosely based. I was like, oh yeah. I mean, I guess it is true though. It kind of handpicks.
So David Benioff of Game of Thrones fame, who I actually had completely forgot that he penned the screenplay.
I didn't realize this either. Dude.
Yeah, super neat. I didn't know what he'd done before Game of Thrones launched him into stardom, but he wrote the screenplay for this, and Homer, of course, the ancient Greek poet, has the other writing credit. So he adapts the Iliad, which is this is what Troy, which depicts the Trojan War, which supposedly took place over many years, which is why I think he thought to adapt into a movie would make sense to condense that timeline, which I think works great. It was a good decision for the sake of the movie, but historians obviously I think rubbed the wrong way. But initially he didn't want, I don't know if it was him or Wolfgang Petersen, probably both, because that character Helen of Troy wasn't in the original draft of the screenplay, because I know Wolfgang Petersen thought that nobody could like accurately portray like her beauty, and he just thought it would be easier not to have the character in the movie, and that there'd be too much anticipation for who would play her and whatnot. So he wanted to avoid that altogether. And then inevitably, I think the studio argued for the character to be made and like brought into the movie, and then to sort of compromise that, Wolfgang Petersen wanted to hire an unknown actress so that there wasn't this expectation of who would play this famous character. And so he ended up finding Diane Kruger, who I don't know what she was doing before this, but apparently not a whole lot. But great role for her for the little screen time that she has. I think she's good in the role and beautiful. I think she matches meets all the standards. And only 5 years later,
when she popped up on screen. Not that I want to just define her by her looks, but
no.
Since the movie kind of like, and I think Imperial Tool's character mentioned something about like her beauty
exactly
when he first meets her, and in that scene she looks absolutely gorgeous when he has to say that to her. But he basically says like he heard rumors about how beautiful she was or something like that, and she just looks really good on camera. Like she is, if you're gonna one, and I can't think of anyone else. I mean, I know if I really thought hard, I can think of whatever actress back then maybe could have played that part. But if you're just basing it, based on who could like make people go to war over her, I guess that they nailed it, at least looks wise. I mean, she's a good actress too, but like she really does. She's like stunning, and I think that is a part of that role. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from the actual acting talent, but like that was my first thought when she popped up on screen. I was like, she looks great.
I think not casting like an A-lister or a really well-known actress in that role was a good decision too, that like benefited the movie. But it's funny, I was thinking, I didn't realize it was Diane Kruger because I've only ever seen her in maybe like one or two of her other roles.
Like National Treasure, like
which I hadn't seen since I was young, so that was far from my mind. It was Inglourious Bastards.
Bastards, yeah.
Which also she co-stars with Brad Pitt just 5 years later after this movie, which I thought was a funny, kind of a cool connection. But I didn't realize it was her until this watch, because I just didn't really know much of her. So I saw the name, I was like, I know that she plays that Bridget von Hammersmark in Inglourious Bastards. But yeah, cool connection. Working with Brad Pitt again in a few years is
she's
fun.
Kind of it's funny because her first big break was in a movie called Wicker Park. It didn't really make a lot of money, but it's her and Josh Hartnett, and Rose Byrne is in that. Rose Byrne is actually in this too.
Yes,
and then she is in National Treasure with Nicolas Cage and Sean Bean. Sean Bean is also in Troy, and then of course she did Inglourious Bastards with Brad Pitt. So I love the little like kind of connection with all these people that were in Troy together. But yeah, this was like, Ricker Park came out first, but Troy was her big kind of breakout, and I'm kind of glad they went with someone that was unknown at the time, because I think it takes. I wonder if the studio was like, if they felt like they needed a woman in the movie just to even appeal to other women, that's like, hey, there's someone here for them to grasp onto. Because what I also remember about the marketing of this movie, for better or worse, what it was really a lot marketed on, I guess that's like the kind of perk to being like at least cognizant of what marketing was like when some of these movies came out. It was really push on the aesthetic appeal of its male cast for the women too. Like when they were doing interviews for it, I remember when Brad Pitt and everyone, they did an interview on the Oprah Winfrey Show when this movie came out, and they talked a lot about the movie, but a lot of the movie, Oprah, a lot of it was just like, oh, you look so good, you have all your muscles, and we see your backside. Like it was like a lot of like that was in the marketing of this, and I guess that makes sense too if you're trying to sell it commercially to a mass audience. Like Brad Pitt was was then, and it still is, a big deal. Orlando Bloom, I mean, he was in the midst of being a big deal. And then Eric Bana the year before, I think, was in Hulk, I think the year before this. So
you're right.
So these are all people in the right moments of their career, particularly the male cast. And then you have like the older actors for a little bit more veteran prestige to like lure in that audience. So you have like the Peter O'Tooles and the Brian Coxes to kind of get that crowd in. So I think casting wise, even though I read later that Brad Pitt kind of was forced to do this movie, he didn't really exactly want to do it.
I think he backed out of The Fountain, right? Darren Aronofsky's, and he
owed them a movie. He owed them a movie, and they put him in this. We can get into specifics. I did want to talk to you a little bit about his performance as a whole, because if there was one thing that kind of kept me at a distance from parts of the movie, was his performance a little bit, because I felt like he was a little bit. It just felt like at times felt a little like he looks the part for sure.
Oh yeah.
But there were moments where it kind of felt a little flat compared to someone like Eric Bana, who I thought brought a lot of like kind of gravitas and emotion to his performance. Like, so comparing the two, it was hard. And then Orlando Bloom, I mean, like he's good. Like, he plays the character well, but this is very much like that was in his wheelhouse, playing these kind of roles like this. Like you could probably interchange just him and Will Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean, and like they almost have the same characteristics, especially their need to like save a beautiful woman. So like not a bad performance, but something that he became known for playing at that time. But I do want to ask you, what did you think overall of Brad Pitt's portrayal in this movie?
So having seen it several times, I gotta say I didn't really know about his like apathy towards doing the movie and the whole contractual obligation with Warner Bros. to do it after dropping out of The Fountain. That was all new information to me, but I never interpreted him as like phoning it in or anything, or not being happy to be there, because I think there's a good amount of attention drawn to like Achilles' character and how apathetic he is to he's very nihilistic guy. He's done with fighting. He's in it for himself. He's not a fan of like the team he's even fighting for. He has this clash with Agamemnon, doesn't want to, has no interest in serving him. And so every time he's called to fight, it's not really for the reasons that he wants to do it. So I think they do a good job early on setting up that antagonistic relationship between the two of them. Like in the very first one-on-one fight where he says that quip to Brian Cox's character as he's going to fight that soldier. He goes, "Imagine a king that fights his own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight?" You can just hear the spite in his voice and the disinterest he has in serving this king. That I felt that was kept pretty constant throughout the movie, amongst though some more poignant moments where he's like speaking to some characters one-on-one, like Odysseus or Rose Byrne's character. But I never thought of it as like his performance not being like not being all into the role, but that's because I probably was, shielded by that knowledge of him not really being too huge on the movie itself. So that never came through to me. But when you think about it, though, he did commit quite a bit to that role. He had like a really, really strict regiment, diet, and exercise for 6 months to prepare for the role. So he, in some ways, I know contractually more than anything else, but he did go all in for that role, and he looks like a Greek god fighting out there.
It's true. I mean, he is the kind of person that can go in, like, not like he's ever in like bad shape, but he'll go in and out of stuff like that for roles. I mean, like you see it in this, you saw that in Fight Club. He's also pretty jacked in that movie too. But yeah, I think he's the kind of person that is still committed, even if, you know, he wasn't all in on wanting to do it. This reminds me a little bit
about it. Yeah.
Right. Compared to someone like, I don't know if you remember when we did the anniversary for The Italian Job, and like Edward Norton was like forced to do that. And I think you kind of like when we were talking about his performance in that, you can kind of see that a little bit, even though he's not bad in the movie, you can tell that he's like, you know, like, yo, I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because I have to be.
Putting up a fuss a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think you totally get that with Brad Pitt here. I mean, like the scene where his cousin, when he finds out about that, I thought that was really good. He handled that. I think that was the most emotion I think you see from him for me. But I mean, but I guess like a part of me was like, am I being too hard on it, or is that just who Achilles was perceived to be? Maybe that is the personality, and maybe he is playing it the way it's supposed to be played, and I should probably not be on it.
That's how I always looked at it, but I think you could be onto something, because obviously things were not, you know, all hunky-dory behind set, and Brad didn't really seek this role out more than it kind of came to him. So I think you could be onto something there. I never realized that though. So next time I watch this movie, I'll be looking for that. But I tend to lean to the side that Achilles is written in this sort of apathetic way that doesn't demand a lot of emotion, because he's not really interested in being in this fight in the first place. I don't know if that's historically accurate, but definitely for how it's his character's painted in this movie anyway.
Yeah. And these, honestly too, like before I forget, like these kind of movies kind of sprung up a lot after Gladiator, right? I mean, it seems like that made these movies pretty kind of a, you know, like
the sword and sandal epic.
Yeah, when one hits, every studio is like, yeah, we need ours, kind of thing. I'm just like, I was just taken back to when we saw it in theater, because it was an opening night thing, and it was pretty packed. It had a big opening weekend for the time. It was like a $46 million opening weekend, which is pretty good for a movie this long, and a movie like this. I think it's a pretty decent summer movie opening too. And yeah, there was like a huge kind of resurgence in audience for these kind of movies back then. And it very, you know, during that period of like the early to mid, you know, 2000s, where we were getting a lot of these, and even some of the same people were popping up in them. I read someone's like review of this movie. He only gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars at the time, and he said the hardest thing for him while watching it was, while there were scenes that were like very rousing and epic, and he enjoyed some of that, you know, he was so like immersed in stuff like Lord of the Rings, which he kind of felt like had that, you know, showcase a lot of that stuff so much better and grander, that it was hard not to compare what he was seeing in Troy to like something that, you know, maybe would have presented this a little bit better than that. But that being said, I think overall, I will never take anything from the production of things, like visually and all that. Like, it's a solid movie on those fronts, I think. I wouldn't, even though there might be other movies that have technically done this better, but I still think it holds its own. And I think that's why the fan base is so strong. Like, you know, sometimes some of these movies I'll look up on IMDb and I wonder what the user rating is. I was surprised to see that it had a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb, which is pretty good for, you know, I was expecting like a 6.5 or something like that in that range.
Right.
And it was pretty high. And like I found out, like, just researching it after, you know, either before and after that, the fan base for this movie is pretty significant. And I had no idea until you kind of pitched it as your pick. I was like, oh, like maybe he just really likes it. And then when I had to like look into it, I was like, no, a lot of people like it.
I feel though, like this is a movie that has an audience that's going to be loyal to it. Like you said, it's a pretty dense story. It's almost 3 hours long, the theatrical cut anyway. It's a sword and sandals epic. Like, the people that are going to like this movie are probably going to return to it. It doesn't appeal really to a lot of other demographics. So I think that could have something to do with the audience score. And as you mentioned too, very much more like an audience favored movie than it was like critically. I don't know what its Rotten Tomato score is, but it's got a 56 Metascore, right in the middle of the ballpark. And I think that sort of the loose adaptation of the movie might have been responsible for at least some of that in the reviews. But turning that big, dense, years long story and an epic poem into a watchable length movie. I thought, David Benioff, for all intents and purposes, did a pretty good job. That's never bothered me, but I never looked at this movie with a historical perspective. I just looked at it as like a good war movie with a strong love story in the center of it, which I wanted to ask you what you thought of the love story. Cause really the whole conflict is sparked from, Paris, or Orlando Bloom's character, and his love of Helen, who he steals in the middle of the night
stealing her and stows her away. There's some good. I will say there's some good needle drop lines. I forget what it was when he has to fight. Brian Cox, because all these, Brendan Gleeson, so he has to fight him, and I think he says something along the lines like the sun was shining when when your wife left you, or something like that. Yes. Or shining bright when your wife left you. I was like, that doesn't even sound like a line that would come from that period. That sounds like modern day shade. But I was like, good. It was a really good kind of piece of dialogue.
He's retorting to Brendan Gleeson saying, saying that he stole her in the middle of the night. He goes, no, the sun was still shining when she left you. Yeah, it was a good, good quip. What I wanted to ask you about that though, did you think that the love story is it a common enough theme throughout, or do you think it kind of gets lost amongst the more war heavy aspects of this movie? Was there a good balance, or do you think one kind of is stronger than the other?
I think it got a little lost eventually, and other aspects of the movie began to take over. That's why I kind of comment on what I said about her screen time. Is I didn't find out later that she wasn't even in the original script and all that, and they kind of it was like a studio decision to kind of put that character.
A good studio decision, I think. I don't know.
I think it helps. I think it helps because I'm trying to imagine it without her, and then the motivation just being there is something very poignant about the motivation starting from that and brimming from that. Because I think that's a part of every kind of epic grand story like this. It might be cliche, but it works for a reason, and that's why this kind of thing gets reused in other movies and stories too. Yeah, I do think it gets lost in a lot because it's weird because for as long as the movie is, it has a lot to kind of cover, and I think even though the movie's long, it doesn't necessarily have even enough runtime, at least in the theatrical cut, to make all of those aspects kind of satisfactory. You're kind of getting bits and pieces of things, and some things work better than others. I did hear in the director's cut that she is in it a little bit more. There's more character stuff for her, and a little bit, and a bit more character stuff for her and Paris together. That kind of reinforce the idea of that relationship and that being the motivation for a lot of this happening. But I think for the most part, if I'm just basing on the chemistry and it's enough that it works, but I kind of wish it didn't take. It feels like it takes a bit of a backseat. Eventually, as the movie progresses,
the end. Okay.
Yeah. Did you think that, or do you think it kind of is served well throughout?
It's never been something that I forgot. I guess to me, it always felt like it was consistent throughout. Obviously, when the battles are raging and there's several either one-on-ones or epic, armies clashing sort of battles throughout this movie, there's several scenes of that. That love story is going to take a back seat. It's not nearly at the forefront. But I feel like there's enough, again, throughout a dense runtime. I think it's edited in a way that we're kind of brought back to it when we need to be. And if you are forgetting about what the whole conflict is around, we get a scene with Helen and Paris. But I do think it's also the crux of the battle is also kind of being hijacked by Agamemnon himself, who wants to just conquer all of Greece and looks at Troy as this, this place that has been famously never been conquered, never been breached. So he has his own stake in this battle too. It's not, he agrees obviously to help his brother seek revenge on Paris and the Trojans, but there's two sort of reasons why this battle is happening. So I think the love story also is sharing that with Agamemnon's conquest.
Kind of Agamemnon almost kind of adopts that feud to really motivate his own self-interest.
It's a convenient conflict for him. Yeah,
I was
exactly.
Because I think he has that line right before they are about to fight too, where he's like, "I didn't come here for your pretty wife. I came here for Troy," basically. And I was like, well, he's telling you right now what his motivations are. Honestly, too, I feel like it's beating a dead horse saying that Brian Cox is good. He's good almost everything, and I kind of forgot that this was one of the things I did forget
That he
about
was
the
in
movie
this?
is that how
Yeah.
not he's in it, but how good he is in it. He has some
Oh,
really good
okay.
lines of dialogue too, and I mean, it's and I've never heard him talk about this movie, and I did try to look up any articles or see if he did speak on it before, but it looks like he's having fun. I don't know.
Oh man,
From
he's having a blast.
it's like scenery chewing without being too scenery chewing. Like he's not over the top where you're it works. I thought he was really like he's such a weasel and in a lot of ways. I don't know. I thought he was really good in it. But yeah, you're right. I think I'm glad you said that, because I think even when the love story is taking a back seat, it is being used as motivations to kind of push other agendas too, and but there is a lot of different parts of the story that had to be served, and like I said, even in a movie this long, it feels like some of those are kind of fighting with each other. But I see your point.
All in all, with all the different things happening in this story in the 3 hours that it almost runs, at least theatrically, I think it's adequate. It's definitely not, the love story isn't the star of the show or driving the vehicle by any means, but I think it's just borders adequate screen time to sort of justify what this whole war initially started by. And we're told as much too by Eric Bana's character, when they're sailing back to Troy from I can't remember, from Sparta, and he's like, I won't have you start a war over a woman, which is obviously what ends up happening. So at least they're backing it up in the actual screenplay.
Yeah, true
as well.
And I know we've mentioned the director's cut a lot, and just for people listening, kind of give you a little bit of what the differences might have been. They said there are at least 1,000 new cuts or almost 30 minutes extra footage, so that pushes the runtime up to 196 minutes. A lot of the copies of the movie that you can find to buy are the director's cut for a lot of people.
Okay.
I mean, I guess that's his definitive version of the movie, I suppose. There are certain things that were just taken out. They got rid of Josh Groban's end credit song at the end of the movie. That's not in there anymore. It said various shots were recut and extended. For instance, the love scene between Helen and Paris was reframed to include more nudity of Diane Kruger. The love scene between Achilles and what am I going to pronounce her name wrong? Is it Briseis? Rose Byrne's character, Briseis, is also extended. They said only one scene was removed. The scene where Helen tends to the wound of Paris is taken out. The battle scenes were also extended, depicting more violence and gore, including much more of Ajax's bloody rampage on the Trojans during the initial attack of the army and his fight with Hector. They said perhaps the most significant was the sacking of Troy, barely present in the theatrical cut, but shown fully here, depicting the soldiers raping women and throwing babies aside, presumably murdering them. Characters were provided more time to develop, specifically Priam and Odysseus. Also, Helen had more time to develop in the director's cut as well. A lot of people who have seen the director's cut prefer this version of the movie. It's so funny that Orlando Bloom had found himself in a similar situation years later with Kingdom of Heaven, which having seen that theatrical cut and the director's cut, they are totally different movies. I don't know.
I have a Blu-ray. I think it's the director's cut, but I got to double check. And I've been really, really wanting to watch it recently. So, what's your take on the two of those? Just as an aside,
the director's cut is it feels like a totally different movie, and it's so much better. If you were
so much better, okay,
yeah. So, if you don't have the director's cut, I'll send it to you, or you can just find it and buy it, whatever you want to do. But sure. The theatrical one was trimmed down, and they thought it's too long and it wouldn't appeal to a mass audience who would think it's too long. That was something that really Scott scoffed at. But if you
that's the case with a lot of his movies.
Yeah, if you read reviews of Kingdom of Heaven, though, of the director's cut, most find it to be almost a great movie especially compared to the theatrical version, and that's the version they feel like everyone should see. So, but interesting that he was in this situation kind of with Troy. I don't think it's as egregious with Troy. I think the theatrical cut is still, for people that like the movie, still like it well enough. It's not one of those things where it's like, oh, this one is so much lesser than quality wise than the director's cut.
I'll be very curious to see how I feel, because I've never seen, at least not to my knowledge, I'm pretty sure I've only ever seen this movie on on like cable and the several times I've seen it on the DVD that I have, which is the theatrical cut. So I'll definitely be looking to get my hands on that director's cut the next time I watch this movie, and that should be an interesting take because I'm looking forward to seeing it. I can't believe I haven't. Unfortunately, like I know that we had planned to watch the director's cut, and Cam initially joined me on that watch for this episode, but just the timing got in the way. We ended up watching Election together, which is why, and because we're recording this today, I didn't have time to get that watch in with him before, so I had to just watch my DVD. So anyway, that's the long and short of why we covered the theatrical cut. I wish we could have seen the director's cut. It's but on the note of Ridley Scott, I've been waiting for him to sort of pop up so we could talk about him, because apparently one of the reasons that Wolfgang Petersen decided to make this movie is because he regretted missing out on the opportunity to direct Gladiator, which obviously went to Ridley Scott. And he was a fan of the film, and obviously it had this international success, won Best Picture. I'm not sure if Ridley won director for Gladiator. Did he? Do you know?
I always forget if he did.
I always forget too.
I'll look it up right now, though.
But clearly, Wolfgang Petersen regretted that decision, and that led to him, not passing up the next Sword and Sandals epic that he was tossed. So that is why he ended up going with Troy. And I think he was a great director to helm this movie. I think Ridley Scott would have had a absolute blast with this movie too. But he did Kingdom of Heaven the next year or so.
Yeah. Oh, for those listening, he did not win for Gladiator. He was nominated though.
Was it Sam Mendes?
Yeah, I feel like that. Yeah, was that the? It says what year
American
was that?
Beauty?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. So
or I could be wrong, but yeah, I think. Yeah, no, I think that is who won. I'm not sure.
Just in case, but I always feel like I have a visual of him winning for Gladiator, but probably because it won Best Picture. No, actually, I guess I'm gonna find out who won that year. That's gonna bother me. I feel like it might have been American Beauty, but we will.
I can never remember if American Beauty is 99 or 2000, and Gladiator's from 2000.
Yeah, American Beauty is from 99, so it's someone else.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up the thing with looking. I mean, you could tell that he really. I mean, Troy seems visually and its tone that it was very much. I mean, of course, a lot of these movies are, but like, I would imagine that he wanted that movie to be his Gladiator, and
exactly.
I mean, based on fan base reactions to Troy, people like it, but I mean, it definitely did not get the awards attention. It did get nominated for Best Costume Design. I saw. But it has a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it's very much mixed reviews. It definitely didn't have
that universal love.
Yeah. It wasn't. I do remember that being the discourse around it, that it was very commercial, very Hollywood. It didn't have enough of the kind of like gravitas to something like Gladiator. But it doesn't have to. I mean, I think it works fine.
Yeah,
as it is.
For sure. I honestly think that Hollywood infusion into this movie adds a charm to it that would probably bother me in other movies, but maybe I'm just biased towards Troy. It never ever. I know that it has like so many like conventional Hollywood tropes in this movie. It, like I said, it feels like a 60s epic more so than one made in 2004. But I just think there's a sentimentality that it has that I love about it. It's corny, and my girlfriend commented on that watching me, how like cringy it was for like the camera's just focusing on Brad Pitt's face as like they're sailing towards Troy on the ocean, and it's just like pondering his face, and like I just eat that up. I thought it was awesome.
I mean, it's a very like old Hollywood thing to do too. I mean, especially when you have like an actor of like that looks like him. He's a movie star.
Yes,
good looks persona.
Camera loves him, so
Camera loves him.
Yeah.
Back to Ridley Scott for a second. Okay, he's never won. Well,
Director?
at least when this was written. He could have been nominated for Gladiator. It won Best Picture, but he wasn't credited as a producer on that film, so he didn't win an Oscar for Gladiator. He lost a directing Oscar that year to Steven Soderbergh for Traffic, which I love Traffic. I would actually watch. I love Gladiator, but I prefer movies like Traffic, so I can see maybe
nice.
Making
I didn't know Soderbergh was an Oscar winner. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, but he wasn't credited as a producer on Gladiator, so that's why he didn't get to pick up a trophy. But, I mean, and also Wolfgang Petersen has directed a lot of, I think that's why people want to work on the people that did decide to do Troy, because of course, he's a German director that did like Das Boot, and he's written a lot of
Right.
people consider that one of the great movies of its time. And he's done stuff like Outbreak and Air Force One. He did the Perfect Storm.
Yep. In the Line of
As
Fire is a
well.
great one.
In
Him
the
and
Line of
Clint Eastwood.
Fire.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people wanted to work with him. I don't think there's any problems in the direction of the movie at all. I think, like I said, the fight scenes, especially the one-on-ones, are really well done. I liked, and I love how, like, in some of them, and most of the one-on-one stuff, how it's just like the fight and the sounds of the fight, and like not like a lot of use of score or anything like that. You only really hear the emotion of like the kind of like energy they're exerting, and then just like kind of the clanks of like all their weapons need each other. Like, yeah. So I love dropping out like all that noise, but that was like a really good decision that kind of there were more at stake in those scenes. I think he directs the hell out of it. I know most people would be like, it doesn't compare to Gladiator in that sense, but I think he definitely holds its own in terms of directing it.
I agree, especially the battle sequences, like whether they're the one-on-ones or the more, the larger scale battles with like several extras utilized too. I think he does a great job helming the action and some of the more poignant dramatic moments too. There's a lot of diversity in like tone in this movie all throughout, and it's so long. I agree. Like, I think he does a really good job directing this movie. I wanted to ask you, I know that there's not much of a stake in this movie, but did you care more for one side or the other? Were you kind of just apathetic as to who won the conflict? I'm not sure if you knew the story of the Iliad beforehand, but like,
so I will be full disclosure. I did not. I mean, I know it's something that you're supposed to like kind of read in like high school. You could have like read it then.
We never read it in my high school, so don't feel bad.
We never read. I never read it. So I had like very, very, very slim fundamental knowledge of this story.
Did you know about Homer though, and the Odyssey?
Yeah.
Okay,
I did know about that.
Yeah.
So I was a little apathetic, but not like I didn't care. I mean, I guess I kind of, I guess I could have been a little bit more invested if I picked one side over the other or something like that. But I was a little bit apathetic towards it, but not in like a negative way. It was just like
whoever wins, that's great. Not so much rooting for one side. Okay.
Right. Like, did you come out wanting one or more than the other?
Well, of all the times I've seen it, I love the characters of Hector and Achilles so much. Like, I know how the movie goes after seeing it so many times, of course, and yet I'm still always so like sad by the time. Spoiler warning in case people have not seen this movie yet or know about any deaths in this movie. But when time comes for Achilles and Hector to have their one-on-one after Hector accidentally kills Patroclus, thinking that it's Achilles, that scene, the whole like when he's yelling Hector's name outside the gates of Troy, and then they have their one-on-one. That's probably my favorite sequence in the movie. Knowing what happens to Hector's character, I'm always still so bummed out when it happens, but I'm also like rooting for Achilles too. I just love how much attention is given to both. They feel like they're like kind of like the main characters of this movie, even though it's Paris and Helen who kind of kickstarted the story. It's really between Achilles and Hector. And I think I love both of them equally. So I'm also on the same sort of camp as you, where if my memory was wiped and I didn't know the outcome of the movie, I don't know who I'd really side with more if I were to watch it with a clean slate. I just like them both.
Well, I think there's something to like about both of them too. Like they are both kind of like defined by like parts of their honor and like like all that stuff. They especially compared to some of the people around him. Like, so when you're like Hector compared to like his brother, again, it's like whatever, it's fine. I mean, compared to like my friend kept calling him a simp, and I was like, I don't want to call him like a simp. That feels like it's a little harsh.
I think there's more poetry behind the romance than to chalk it up to that. But for sure, it needs a definition.
But he really dumbed it down to that, and that's why like I was reminded of like when he finally goes up against Brendan Gleeson's character. My friend, I remember sitting next to like two of my friends in the theater, And the whole time before the fights even started, they were like, "Oh, he's such a bitch!" Like they just didn't like anything about him. And then when he's really like losing the fight, and he like crawls over to his brother, and he's like holding his leg, they were like, "See, he is a bitch." Like, I just remember them saying that right next to me in the theater, like, "See, he's a little bitch." And I'm like, but it made sense for the character, and that's actually what Orlando Bloom had issues
troubles with. Yeah. Did
Yeah,
he not read the
so,
script
like,
before signing on to this movie? Like,
so what I read, and I mean, a lot. Of course, time could change like a lot of these things, right? You know, what was going on 21 years ago when he signed on for it, and how he feels now. But they fed him a line from the movie in this podcast. He didn't recognize it. That was from Kingdom of Heaven, and they're like, "No, it's from Troy." And then he goes, "Oh my God, Troy! Wow, I think I just blanked that movie out of my brain." By the way. And then he was asked to reflect on it. He said that he had to play a bit of a coward in the movie. He says, so many people love that movie, but for me, playing that character was just like, and he did the slits throat motion. Am I allowed to say all these things? I didn't want to do the movie. I didn't want to play this character. His agent pushed him to do it. And then he said, then he kind of gets like more like supportive of it. The movie was great. It was Brad Pitt, it was Eric Bana, and Peter O'Toole. But how am I going to play this character? It was completely against everything I felt in my being. At one point, it says Paris crawls along the floor, having been beaten by somebody, and holds his brother's leg. I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. One of my agents at the time said, but that's the moment that will make it. I completely fell for that line from my agent. And I think that's why I blanked that out from my mind in his experience of doing the movie. Now, I've actually seen people post this story on Twitter X, and a lot of people respectively disagreeing with Orlando Bloom. Some people actually saying that they think it's one of his better performances based on that. That's just who the character was. That is what 100%. He would have done, and you have to take your own thoughts out of it. Like you're not thinking about like what will Orlando Bloom do in that situation.
Exactly. You're playing a character.
Yeah, it's definitely what that character would have done, and it was pretty on brand and in line for what we saw so far from him in the movie. And and honestly, I thought it was, I mean, I didn't look at that moment as like, as some of my friends did it 20 years ago, like, oh, he's a bitch, he's a coward. There was also something pretty like, as the younger brother, like crawling over to his older brother for some kind of protection. I thought there was some kind of like there was a powerful sense in that scene to me, rather than like, oh, he's a coward. I didn't view it the way other people clearly have viewed that scene, even Orlando Bloom. I kind of just looked at it as like, this is a younger brother who is like, I need help. And like, that is what you would do. I mean, in a situation where you felt like you were outgunned, outnumbered, and your older brother, who is stronger, than you,
and known
was
as a
there.
Great fighter.
Yeah, that is what you would do. So I actually would counter that and say that that moment is pretty powerful and doesn't make him look bad. But I guess I can see why he feels that way and why others feel that way. But how do you feel about that whole moment?
Oh, one of my, again, another favorite sequence of mine in the movie. More so, I think what I like most about it is the contrast between him and the man he's fighting, who's like the guy whose wife he stole, Helen's former husband, Menelaus, I was forgetting his name. And like when he's seeing Paris like squirm away and seek the protection of his brother who's standing there, and he yells up at Helen, he goes, "This is what you left me for." And then like him freaking out and then telling Hector, he goes, "I'll slay him at your feet. I don't care if you don't move. Like I'm coming to finish him off anyway." I just love the fury in Brendan Gleeson's performance there. Like you can tell this is the moment that he's been waiting for ever since Helen left him, is just to slay the man that took her from him. And here he is, like finally it's about to happen. And then for him to meet him on the battlefield and act so cowardly is like, no, it's so unsatisfying for him. I think Brendan Gleeson does a great job elevating that scene with like, just, you can just tell the rage that's inside of him. And then it just feels like so like dishonorable for Hector to then like kind of overpower and kill Menelaus, like in defense of his brother. But I think another thing that elevates that scene is like the conversation that they have on the boat when they're first going back to Troy after Paris shows Hector that Helen has been stowed away underneath. And you can just kind of tell that Hector's like, okay, now because you're my brother and I love you, I'm going to be thrust into this war and they're going to come after us. And you've spat on our father's legacy. And so you can see like he's almost like he knows that he's going to defend his brother to the death no matter what, but you can just see like he feels like this isn't right. And I think that whole scene with all of those factors included in it is just so
actually
great,
like
and another awesome
I actually
moment.
really like that. I like that conflict because he is so mad at him when he finds out.
Yeah.
And then like even in the midst of all that anger, he's kind of like he knows what he'll have to do because he's his brother, even though he completely is like, you're a fool, why'd you do this?
Exactly.
I think that happens like, and if you happen to have a younger sibling or whatever, and there's like some kind of disagreement, you can think that your sibling is totally wrong, but like you're going to defend them, you can like
bound by loyalty.
Yeah, privately you'd be like, you fucked up, but like, well, we won't let anyone in public know that I think that you fucked up. But yeah, I also think that's a really at least in the movie, a really cool thing about the relationship. You do get a sense of that that connection and loyalty between them.
Definitely.
And even in just a few scenes, because it's not like they have like a ton of moments where they have to like really display that kind of the brotherly bond between the two of them. But in the moments when they do show it, it counts. That's why I actually do like the scene on the boat. That's why I do like the scene where he crawls over to his brother, like for help. It's just like that's what most younger brothers would do.
Totally.
Also, Hector does kind of warn that he's like, he basically says so many words, like, I'm not just gonna let you like slay my brother right in front of me. Like, something's gonna happen if you try. And he fucked around and found out. And
definitely
gets killed. And then I'm like, when you're watching it, I was like, oh, there's gonna be repercussions to that, isn't it? Like, there's just so many things that happen where you're like, oh, they're not just gonna let that slide.
Then we get an awesome battle scene right after that, which is fantastic.
Yeah, there's just so much. Like, what I will say, even though I feel like, okay, when we were talking about the love story, how that takes a backseat, there are other things that escalate the tension where it's just like, okay, well, this thing happened, so there has to be some kind of like retribution for that thing. And like there's all this like stuff that kind of builds on each other, where it kind of raises the stakes, where there's so many things where it's like, oh, there are so many avenues where people need some kind of payback or something in this movie, where at least you're never bored because there's like always like something coming up next for someone to kind of atone for, basically.
And on that note, I think a lot of those happen so organically that help drive the story forward. Like when Achilles is ready to round up his troops and head home, and you think he never wanted to be in this fight in the first place, and now that he's kind of shown up and done his part, he's ready to hightail it back to Greece. And then finds out his cousin was killed by Hector, and he's like, okay, well, now I got a dog in the fight again, and I'm gonna come out there and help the cause again. Like that was an example to what you were saying about revenge and in the story driving the narrative forward that I thought was really, really well done.
Yeah, I thought so too. And then then you have Hector and him having the fight, and like we said earlier, there's like, I think that's why you were saying it's hard to pick, because both characters, at least for you two, are like just so strong. There's nothing really bad about them, so it's not like you're rooting for like one's good and one's evil, that kind of thing. It's just like they're kind of like have different dogs in said fight, but like
just men of different circumstances that have been drawn together, and I like both of them. So
so there's no like real like bad guy here. I will say though, just from performance wise, I still think Eric Bana is by far the best person in the movie, like performance wise.
I agree, he's a very good performance.
And I like, it's coming, it has to happen, but like losing him, you feel it when we lose him. But yeah, I think like I don't know if Eric Bana, I was trying to think about this because I think I need to watch more of his movies, because I was like, he was a thing for like a bit, and then like I don't want to say he fell off. I think that's the wrong term, but like I feel like he was destined to be a bit bigger than what he was, and like he seemed like he's someone that is maybe consistently works, but there seemed like there was more emphasis on him being a bigger star at one point.
Yeah, his 2000s were really big, but honestly, mentioning it, I don't know much after that. I know he's got a few smaller roles in some big 2010s movies. But I was curious on the note of him. I was going to ask if you've ever seen him in Steven Spielberg's Munich, which came out the following year. He's awesome
I did see
in that movie.
Yeah,
Great.
Oh, he did the Dirty John limited miniseries. I did watch that. I forgot he was in that.
That was recent, eh?
Yeah. But yeah, like he, I felt like he was destined to be a bigger name than what he was. He's really good in this stuff. The MVP for me in the movie.
Absolutely.
Completely. I feel like he was just like, and it's not like everyone else is bad. Like I talked about like Brian Cox also stealing his scenes too. It felt like Eric Bana did not just take this as like some kind of Hollywood commercial movie. Like his performance, maybe if people were talking about if there was any prestige missing from it, I think he was picking up on that and was playing that. It felt like it was much more serious for him. And he definitely has a bit more nuance than like some of the other characters and performers do in the movie.
I think Peter O'Toole, who plays his on-screen father, also does a great job at bringing some prestige to that role, particularly in the scene where he, under the cover of night, sneaks over to the Greek side and asks for Achilles to release the body of Hector back to him. Like that scene and like how he pleads really his case. Good. Oh, such great acting.
Yeah, really good. And he's not in a ton of scenes either, but I think he pretty much owns the scenes that he's in, which is why this is part of me just thinks that like maybe at the time, because Peter O'Toole, I think he's passed away since, I believe. But
I believe so too.
And I think that some people when they're old, they just like be talking, and so I don't know if he like how he really his comments about Troy. And they said Peter O'Toole spoke negatively of the film during an appearance at the Savannah Film Festival, stating he walked out of the movie 15 minutes into a screening, which I think would be before his actual screen time.
Much before, I think,
and criticized the director, slamming him as a clown. I don't get a sense of anyone that seems like maybe because like he was a veteran, he's a pro, he wouldn't show if he didn't like what he was doing, or maybe like what he was doing like on set felt different than what the movie was. I mean, that first 15 minutes that you watched, maybe you didn't feel like the movie he was shooting, even though he left before any of his scenes. But it's just he's so good in the scenes that he has in the movie that it's so weird for me to think that that's how he felt about it. But I don't know. I don't agree with him, but
me neither. I mean, who knows what happened on set and what his quarrel with Wolfgang Petersen was. But on his IMDb right now, the 4 movies that he's known for, according to the app, Troy is one of them, which is, I think, kind of ironic. Yeah, and of course, I forgot he was Lawrence of Arabia, which is pretty sweet too. Yeah, that guy was definitely a vet, and he died sadly in 2013. But he was well into it. He was 81, so. Yeah, that was at the tail end of his career, and he's great as Priam.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I always think of people when they talk negatively about their movies. It's like it always is interesting to me, but I guess when you're a legend as he was, he can do that. So
definitely, he's earned his keep for sure.
Yeah, and kind of piggyback off that, we did mention the thing with Brad Pitt, but to go into more detail, he said he had to do Troy because he pulled out of another movie, and that we found out later is The Fountain, and then had to do something for the studio. So I was put in Troy. It wasn't painful, but I realized that the way that movie was being told was not how I wanted it to be. I made my own mistakes in it. What am I trying to say about Troy? I could not get out of the middle of the frame. It was driving me crazy. I become spoiled working with David Fincher. It's no slight on Wolfgang Petersen. Das Boot is one of the all-time great films, but somewhere in it, Troy became a commercial kind of thing. Every shot was like, here's the hero. There was no mystery. And it's funny because like I feel like what he's mentioning is some of the shots that you kind of point out where there's a lot of like, emphasis on, which is kind of like par for the course for those type of movies. So, I mean, I think that kind of...
Exactly.
Like, yeah. But I mean, when you're in it, I guess it might just be a different dog in the fight when you're a part of the movie. But,
yeah, I find it hilarious how he mentions that he found himself in center frame so much. Like, yeah, dude, you were like leading this multi-million-dollar movie. You were Brad friggin' Pitt at one of the heights of your career in the 2000s. So I don't understand why that's so surprising to him. And he's playing one of the greatest warriors in all of Greek mythology. I just find that a hilarious thing that he took issue with. But he makes a good point though, being spoiled after working on a couple movies with David Fincher, and how his how he kind of unconventionally treats his lead characters, and how they're not very much like such standard Hollywood heroes. So I get maybe he'd been more accustomed to those sort of roles leading up to Troy. So I guess that kind of makes sense. Context is key. So, but I find that hilarious in any way.
Yeah. And then also other criticisms fell on screenwriter David Benioff, who later became one of the creators of the fantasy TV series Game of Thrones. He will always be cool to me because he also wrote 25th Hour. So I will.
Nice.
I can't really. So I can't say anything. I can't say anything bad about him. I know Game of Thrones fans feel some kind of way based on how the show wrapped up.
He's written some black movies though. But yeah, Gemini Man. I did not know he did. He's written more than I realized.
Oh my god, that was on TV the other night while we were hanging out, and someone was trying to figure out. They were like, "Is this iRobot?" I was like, "No, it's Gemini Man." And then they muted it and listened to music. I was like, "Thank God."
Nice.
But they said he was criticized for taking on too much material by covering the complete and lengthy chronology of the Trojan War. But he claimed he was aware of this challenge. He is quoted addressing this rather bluntly in an article by actor David Goldsmith in the journal Creative Screenwriting. So the script covers the Trojan War in its entirety, whereas the Iliad is only one fragment of it. I didn't want to have a little title saying flash forward 9 years. It would have made it more faithful to the source material, but it wouldn't have been effective for the movie. I always followed the route that I thought was better for the movie. If that meant that I was cheating on Homer, then so be it.
Yeah, I commend him for adapting it more so to please the format of the movie for sure. Good call. I don't know how you.
And by the way,
Iliad otherwise.
Yeah, that's a hard thing too when you're adapting a book or a novel or anything or any epic story or anything, comic books, whatever it is. Some things work better on the page than they do in the film format. It is what it is. There's parts of like a written story that won't translate well on film. I know I've said that to some people, and then their argument is like, well, if you can't adapt something like that faithfully, then don't do it. But I think there is some I think there's wiggle room there to like change things from book to screen, story to screen, that some people who are too faithful to source material don't allow for. And I don't think it's their prerogative to do that, but I don't think it's entirely fair to do that because there are certain aspects of stories that just don't work well on film. They work well on the page, but there's a lot to cover, and I think that he did the best he could for the movie. So
yeah,
I don't think it was a detriment at all.
No, I agree. So props to you, David Benioff, which again, it's so surreal seeing his name as a writing credit of this movie.
Because as you heard, Jackson said you made some whack movies, so the fact that he's giving you some credit is nice on his part.
But he did adapt one of my favorite shows of all time, so I got to give the guy some cred. But moving on towards the latter stage of our episode, I'm interested to see your final thoughts on the movie and what you'd inevitably rate it. Because it's my pick and it's no secret I love this movie, I want to give you the honors of going first.
Yeah. I do want to ask you once before jumping in that, just to kind of briefly mention it.
Yeah.
The end of the movie, I mean, because we know where it's all headed. How did you like how that was executed? How if anyone knows anything about Achilles and what happens, a lot even people with the even smallest knowledge of who that is knows what happens. But I want to know like what you thought of how that was portrayed in the film.
Well, first of all, I'm interested to hear that in the director's cut, the whole sacking of Troy is apparently a much longer sequence. I think that would have been really cool and more graphic. I think is neat. I think it's definitely run through in the theatrical cut. It's a very quick sequence coming at the end of the movie, but I feel like there's just been such a build up towards this at the time that it happens in the film that we know where it's going to. Maybe I'm blinded by love for this movie and seeing it so many times that it just doesn't bother me, but I can see after watching that director's cut when I do kind of looking back more negatively at the theatrical cut. However, that being said, like I think the filming and like the destruction of the set in the sacking of Troy sequence is great, quick as it might be. I'm not too familiar on like I wouldn't know, I guess, if like if Achilles, spoiler warning, death in Troy is different than it's been like portrayed, or like how it happened according to Greek mythology. So I it sucks that it comes at the hands of Paris, who like has this final
That's how
moment.
my buddy Mike that's what he hates about it. He's like, oh, he gets to come back and take him out. I was like, well, it makes sense from like a narrative standpoint because of what happened with his brother. Like, it makes sense that it's him. But I also get my friend's point. Yeah. If you feel that like Paris is a simp and a coward, it probably doesn't go over well that he's the one that gets to do it.
So it's such like it's so ironic that like this cowardly man who's never killed anybody before would end up taking out, you know, Greek's most legendary warrior, and from a distance, like not in an actual fair fight, but with a bunch of arrows. Yeah. I love though that, like, you know, his Achilles heel is, you know, at least they like let it go out that way, and that is sort of like the first injury that he gets that makes him more susceptible to arrows, and So I'm fine with how it goes out. Like, I would have liked to have seen Achilles get out because I'm championing Brad Pitt's character in this movie, but it's okay. I'm split on it being Paris because he's cowardly, and I, you know, don't want it to be him. I want Paris to get out, and I'm glad that him and Helen both make it to the end of the movie, and it also is retribution for his brother, but just doesn't feel earned by him, but not enough that like it throws me off or I'm not happy with it. It's just kind of how the story was written, so that's how we're gonna get it. But oh well. What did you think about? Did you think differently?
I mean, I felt, and it is interesting too, reading that you said the Sacking of Troy is longer in the director's cut. I mean, I think keeping that would have been more beneficial to the theatrical cut. I think that is one thing that could have stayed and probably would have worked even more so. I get why people. I see what you're saying. My buddy Mike, who will listen to this episode, because I thought I would mention him being like, I want everyone to know that I think that character is a bitch. I get why it's someone like that would be upset that that's who does it, but like I said, it makes sense. Like, it's this whole like kind of like, you know, he gets to avenge his brother. Man, there's that part of it that works, but I understand like it not being ideal that it's him. Out of, you know, and like you said, like Achilles is like great epic acclaimed warrior, and I mean, it wouldn't happen in a fair fight
exactly.
You know, he had to full on go Legolas on him to even to make
that's
it happen.
There you go. Exactly.
But for the sake of the story in the movie, I'm fine with it. And it is jarring. It's still jarring to see, though. I mean, it's done well when it does happen. Like, because even though, like, of course, that small part of the story I didn't know seeing that in theaters. I remember when it happened that was one of the things that came back. It was like everyone in the theater were shocked by it, even though I think everyone in that room knew that it's going to happen. But it was like, oh shit, yeah, that is where we the whole Achilles heel thing comes from. That is this is where it logically has to go. But I thought it was still handled really well. So yeah. And I've been going back and forth on the score for this.
Okay. I do that a lot of times when we're rating a movie on an anniversary episode, and a lot of the times it's a game time decision. So
yeah, I don't like I want to do what you do sometimes. Like I can't give it like a full like 4, but I would like, but I feel like 3.5 is too low. So if I get like 3.7, 3.8, it I probably go there.
All right, I think maybe higher than I anticipated you were going to rate it based on our conversation. So that's great.
And I'm also like, I think what takes it just a couple notches is, like I said, like we mentioned, like there's certain, like the love story, it feels like there's certain things that take back seats and other things kind of jump in. And I guess that's just the nature of the story that they were telling. And that maybe that isn't something I should be critical of. And then, I mean, I felt one way about Brad Pitt's performance as a whole, but then you kind of described like, maybe that's just who that as written, as described. Maybe that's the personality. So maybe he wasn't phoning that in, and I could think of that a little differently. Maybe
True.
maybe on another watch. I would definitely give the director's cut a shot though, just to
as
see
will
the
I
difference
be.
of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's those little things. So I would like 3.7, like 3.8, not quite a 4.
I like that. That's
Yeah,
awesome. I'm glad
but
you
I
had fun
felt
with the movie and enjoyed it.
yeah, 3.5 felt too low though.
Okay, good.
Right.
Yeah, well, no secret. I mean, we're right around the same score. I give it the edge and would knock it up to a 4 though for sure. There's you know what when I'm watching this movie, there's nothing that like I don't like. I can tell in some of the sequences, like when it comes to the gore and the violence, that it's trimmed down for a theatrical cut, and the
Yeah,
studio kind of got involved a bit. So that's why I'm excited. I have a feeling I would really, really like the director's cut and would probably rate it higher. But for all intents and purposes, like this is a movie I really, really love. I don't know when I even saw it for the first time, but it was when I was younger, and I would always go back to it. I love all the performances from the leads. I love Wolfgang Petersen's direction. I love the classical Hollywood feel to this movie, although I wouldn't like that with others. It's funny how that sentimentality just sticks with Troy for me, and I'm okay with it. And just like the production values of this movie are great. Like there's huge epic battles, composing hundreds of people, great effects, great stunt choreography. Like what more could you want out of a sword and sandals epic? Like it's just got everything that I want in it. So
by the way, I've heard different people. Some people love the score by James Horner, and some people were critical of it. I thought the score was pretty good for what the movie was. I mean, maybe it's not going to be like at my top scores like ever, but
no, I agree. It's somewhere in the middle for me. I like it.
I thought it served a lot of the scenes really well. So I wanted to mention that because I read that too, where some people were kind of critical of it, but I thought score was pretty good.
He only had 4 weeks to do it though, because he had.
I know they had hired someone else, right? And they dropped that person like who worked on the music for over a year, and then kind of was like, and they didn't give him time to even fix it after a test screening. They were like, no, we're just gonna get someone else to do it.
That is completely wild to me. I don't know what the behind the scenes that looked like or what the issues were, but I don't blame James Horner for. I think the score definitely could have been more fantastical, but the guy had to do it in a month, and I think he did a pretty good job, all things considered. So, but it's no Hans Zimmer Gladiator score, that's for sure.
No, it's not. And by the way, I am gonna later tonight after we're done doing our second episode, I'm gonna look up Orlando Bloom promoting this movie in 2004. I just wanted to see if he looks like he's like, oh, I don't want to promote this, or if he was like so like, oh, it's just so, like if he was just so happy to be a part of it.
Feel free to send me the clips.
Yeah, because like I don't know. From what I remember, he seemed like he was down to do the movie, but I'll just have to pull up someone's from YouTube to see if you could tell that he's just kind of like, I don't want to be here to promote this. I also remember my friend Shannon, when this movie came out, she had this movie poster in her room, and she only had it because she loves Orlando Bloom. But I'm looking at the movie poster right now, and he's just a small image. I mean, he's not. I mean, compared to the other two, playing the Brad Pitt and Eric Bana, he's like in the middle. Of course, like in the middle with Helen, which makes sense because like this is all sparked by that, but. He's such a tiny image on the poster. I don't even know why she even wanted it.
That is funny.
But kudos to her because Shannon loved her some Orlando Bloom for many, many years. She doesn't anymore. She's like, oh, he got old. I was like, oh,
that's what happens. Yeah. But yeah, 2000s Orlando Bloom was a treat for sure. I don't blame her.
Yeah. And before we wrap things up in this episode, because we're not doing any news, because we have some anniversaries to cover this week, so we will be back next week with a full on. I'm sure there will be a lot more to cover. There was some stuff this week, but we're gonna throw it into another episode next week. But we do need to talk about box office because we're gonna add predictions at the end of this episode. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes actually did pretty decent. It actually came in above. A little slightly above its tracking with a $58.4 million opening, which was like a lot. It said 56 on Sunday and actually went up today, so that's pretty good. They said the global opening was $131.2 million, so that kind of rubs the stink of how the Fall Guy did last week. So it looks like the summer movie season is starting
officially. Nice.
Officially, it did get a B cinema score, so they're thinking that might indicate mixed word of mouth because like I think the other ones all got A minuses or something.
Okay.
But it is higher than Tim Burton's cinema score for his Planet of the Apes. Like that got a B minus.
That's great.
So there's at least that. I don't know. You're seeing it tomorrow, so you'll let us know.
Next
Probably
news
next week.
episode for sure. I'll definitely let you know what I think
Otherwise,
about it.
and actually, what we will talk about too on our next news episodes, Jackson also saw Challengers, and I actually still haven't read your
Oh,
Letterboxd
okay.
thing. Yeah, I'm gonna read it when I'm done. But he finally saw it. It seemed like he really liked it, so that'll
I
be something
did.
else we can bring up and discuss on our news episode next week. But I think I won this one. I think I said 56
You
million
did.
for Kenya.
Yes, you
So
did. So you beat. Yeah, I went
because
55.
I went one. I went one above you. I
Yes.
kind of like prices righted you.
Congratulations.
You know, you're like finally.
They don't ask how, they ask how many, right?
Yeah. So this week, we are predicting The Strangers Chapter 1, which opens this Friday. The social media embargo has been lifted on the movie. I've heard some mixed things from people who said it's pretty scary. But even in those positive ones, they say that they said it starts almost like it feels like a beat for beat remake of the original, which is what I kind of was afraid of.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, but then like some people who didn't like it said that there's some CW level acting in the beginning of it, but then it says it gets better as it progresses. From the 2 stars in the movie, they say they play frightened very well towards the end, but they said it's a little rough at the start. Needless to say, the social media embargo reviews aren't like I mean, I'm glad to see some good ones, but then there were some ones from people I trust that were like negative, where I was like, but I find out tomorrow as of this recording. I'm seeing it early tomorrow. The movie review embargo lifts a day before the movie opens. So that's always fun. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh boy.
So let's see what we can have for comparison's sake. I'm going to look up what the original Strangers did when it first opened. Oddly enough, I think around 2 when it came out in 2008, I believe. Yep. Another movie that's actually sat on the shelf for a while before they released it, and then it did surprisingly well. All right, so it opened to $20.9 million on a $9 million budget. It made $52.5 million domestic and $82.4 million worldwide. The sequel, Strangers Prey at Night, opened less, $10.4 million. It ended up making $24.5 million domestic and $31 million worldwide. So a big drop off from the original movie, but that movie did definitely catch on home video when it came out there. It's become a bit of a cult hit in its own right. And now let's see where box office is predicting Strangers Chapter 1. I still don't see even horror fans being especially excited for this first chapter of a planned trilogy. But who knows? I don't know if you...
Do you know much about... I'm just looking at on this movie that Rennie Harlan is directing, and he did Nightmare on Elm Street 4, which I thought is pretty crazy.
He did. Yeah, and that Nightmare on Elm Street 4 is... so I love the Dream Warriors, right? That's the third one.
Right.
The third Nightmare on Elm Street is where you get a hint that Freddy is still scary, but that's when it kind of starts to switch into like
goofy territory.
He says really quippy kind of funny things. It goes full all out in Nightmare 4. They call Nightmare 4 like kind of like the MTV generation Nightmare on Elm Street because it made a lot of money. It made a lot of money when it came out, but it was when Freddy became like a pop culture icon and less of like, you know, a scary man who like invades your nightmares. So
right.
And it's way more action oriented than the other movies. So like Rennie Harlan, you get a sense of like that is what he was good at. And he directed Die Hard too. So he has
that's what I'm seeing here too as well. Deep Blue Sea. Like he's got some interesting directorial credits. I didn't know anything about who was doing this.
And I actually love Deep Blue Sea. I think Deep Blue Sea is so much fun. But yeah, the tracking for this one right now, and it could go up when reviews officially come out, but 7 million on the low end for the opening weekend, 13 million on the high end.
And what kind of budget are we working with here?
And how the hell do you start like I mean, I can't imagine if you're trying to plan a trilogy and this happens to bomb. Like, I don't want it to bomb per se, but does it bode well for the rest of them if this doesn't hit the way it needs to hit?
Definitely not. I would I don't want to see it fail necessarily, but I do want to get away from this trend of planning trilogies before the first installment even comes out. So if this does something to thwart that, then I'm fine with it. But between 7 and 13, eh? Well, you won last week, so why don't we start with your prediction?
All right. Ooh, and the reported budget I'm seeing right now is $25 million. So that's way up from like the first movie. Yeah, not expensive by any means, but it seems too expensive for this.
Agreed.
I can't see it breaking out the way they want it to, but I'll go slightly above the high end and say 14.
Okay, very gracious of you. To keep it interesting, I will go a little bit lower, get more of a gap, and go somewhere in the middle with 10. Just because I can see it kind of it'll be good for couples that want to go for a good weekend scare, perhaps, or fans of the earlier two movies that are looking to see how it stacks up. But other than that, I just don't see the appeal for a lot of people.
Yeah. So part of me wants to rewatch the original maybe tonight because I'm seeing this tomorrow. I haven't watched it in a while, so it's a quick watch too. It's not like it's not a long movie.
True.
Any means. But yeah, that's where we're at. All right, 14 and 10. And I hope it's good. I hope to report back tomorrow.
Yes, I'll be interested to see what you think about it, and I want to know if you remember it, if it's a beat for beat kind of copy of the 2008 one. This is very much the vibes I'm getting from it. So, but who knows?
Yep. Well, guys, that has been episode 172, right? Back to the Blockbuster, covering the 20th anniversary of Troy. This was Jackson's pick. Good pick because I hadn't watched it since theater, so it was a fun revisit, and I actually did really enjoy it. And I will definitely be going to look at the director's cut at some point to see how it measures up against this as well.
Me as well.
We also my pick we're recording tonight for election, so we'll be recording that tonight, and that'll be coming out soon after the Troy anniversary episode. And you can catch all of these wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, but also you should support our network playlist. They have a playlist studio app where other fantastic shows are housed as well. You can get it in the iOS store or the Google Play store. You can also find some of our stuff on YouTube as well. We are slowly, gradually building that up and trying to take off in that space as well. So if you wanted to subscribe to our channel, you can find it by searching Back to the Blockbuster on YouTube. And like we said, we will be coming at you with a fresh news episode next week, which will probably have a ton of news for us to cover. Don't worry, we have not let the news take a backseat. It will be coming back next week. But until then, I've been Gaius. This has been Jackson. Always a pleasure talking movies with my friend, and I will see you very, very shortly.
Yes, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.